Have you ever wondered, is it just me? Like in any kind of scenario, is it just me? Am I the only one? This topic, it's risky, okay? There's my disclaimer. I invite you to stay seated, stay put, breathe through it, make it your practice, whatever it takes. Okay, because this topic has been on my heart for a very long time, and I've noticed in our summer series, I know Rev Chris mentioned it, and there was another, I don't remember if it was Bethany or Robin, mentioned this topic. So I'm going to hazard a guess that we all live with this thing. Are you ready for the word? Shame. Did you feel the energy shift? Shame. Has anyone ever heard the phrase, shame on you? I see it online quite a bit, and every time I see it, there's a little niggle as my stomach tightens. Has anybody ever used the phrase, shame on you? Brene Brown, anybody familiar with her work? Brene Brown? Yeah. She's right up there with Martha Creek and Byron Katie. She wrote a book called, Is It Just Me? I Thought I Was the Only One. And I've been studying this book recently, so let's start out with a basic platform. I bet if I had you verbalize your thoughts on what is shame, that we'd have a whole bunch of different perspectives, right? So it can show up as a feeling in the pit of our stomach. Anybody get that? Where the stomach just kind of locks up. It brings a very dark energy, and it can actually viscerally hurt, physically or emotionally or spiritually. Shame involves our fear, innate fear, of being perceived as flawed, less than perfect. Nay, I say human, that we be perceived as a human being. And as Rev Erin says, we're here growing up all over each other. So we use it because we feel like we're unworthy of acceptance, we're unworthy of belonging, and we protect ourselves from being found out, to being exposed. Shame is something that can live deep within. And I don't know about your perspective, but I'm feeling like the worse my shame is on the inside, the harder I work to make myself look good on the outside. Shame is the very loud or really subtle voice of perfectionism within us. Perfectionism, does that term have a little physical niggle also? Not only do we feel shame, we use it as a tool to control each other. And we see it used as a tool to control each other. So shame is typically forced underground, deep in the shadows of our consciousness, what Charles Fillmore, Unity co-founder, would call our subconscious. And shame can be a deadly toxin. Have you noticed that fear and shame are a really tight couple? Usually with shame, there's an underlying energy of fear. So I want to distinguish between shame and guilt. I used to use those words interchangeably. And I learned, actually, in the ministerial education program from the great Robert Brummett, shame is a way of being. It means that we believe I'm a bad person. I am a bad person. Guilt has to do with thinking I did a bad thing. You see, there's very different energy there. And Brene Brown also went into some interesting energy around I'd never thought of it before, how guilt can actually be a motivator for raising our consciousness. So let's talk about what Brene names as some common categories of shame. This is no secret. Would anybody vote that the first influencer of shame is the media? Hugely, hugely invasive. We have the internet at our fingertips, on our wrists, some people, which terrifies me. On our wrists. We have it, oh, my phone's down there. We have it in our hand. And we have social media that I can't seem to quit completely, even after I watched the documentary about it. We have general media, TV, magazines. Listen to this one. Brene Brown has done interviews and research for decades on shame, and she wrote that in over 90% of her research interviews, body image and weight are noted as key shame issues, especially in females. 90%. That's huge. And she also lists these shame categories. See if any feel a little familiar to you. Our family of origin, parenting, shame around parenting, my Achilles heel. Religion, any shame in religion in our experience? Gender, health, work, money, aging, 70 is a thing. Don't get me started. And trauma. Trauma. Many of our early shameful experiences, little peeps, that stuff is stored in our brains as trauma, as threats that we can't control. So our triggers, when we feel that stomach nudge or that gasping, holding our breath, our triggers often slam us right back into that original experience of when we learned to feel shame. Is anybody familiar with or participated in the practice of NET, neuro-emotional technique? Oh, it's fascinating. It's a kinesthetic therapy, and over the years I've had several sessions with a couple of different really, really good practitioners. And what it gets down to is our thoughts and beliefs, what we're congruent with, even though we may not be conscious of it, and it cooks it down to a core emotion. And then there's a process that we do through the NET. So it didn't take me very long to discover when we were going through all the emotions in the chart, I would say a good 80% of the time I landed on shame. So when I was having sessions with Martha Creek, and we'd be talking about my issue, she would start to ask questions, and I'd burst into tears and say, could we just cut to the chase and call it shame? Could we just start there and work with that? So when that trigger happens, our primal brain is kicked into gear. And you know the three responses, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. So if we're fighting, we're arguing, we're pushing against it. If we're fleeing, we're turning our back on it, total denial. I bought a greeting card years ago, and I kept it because it was too precious to send. And it says, my friends all tell me I'm in denial. And on the inside it says, which is a total lie. So we run away in complete denial, or we just freeze. We become paralyzed, and we shove that shame deep down, and we bury it in secrecy and in silence. Meanwhile, you know what that shame energy is doing? It's growing like a bad tumor, toxic, consuming everything in sight. So here's the thing, because, I don't know, for everybody I know, shame started at such an early age, the way we handle it, the way we navigate it, is so ingrained that we can't even see it. We're not conscious of it. And it can feel most powerful. This is a good nut. It can feel most powerful when we believe our perceptions of what others expect of us. Expectations is a whole nother topic that I want to get into someday soon. So existing in our shame culture means we are constantly overwhelmed in feelings of fear and blame and disconnection. And Brown writes about something that she calls the shame web. It's a part of our family system. It's a part of our culture. If we look around, can we identify any peeps around us with whom we feel shamed when we're in their presence? Could be very, very subtle. Could be very passive aggressive. Could be a lot of things. And it can be very obvious. And let us not forget, it could be our partners, our friends, our work colleagues, our bosses. And have any of us been socialized to get really good at shaming ourselves? You listen to your self-talk once in a while? Have you ever said to yourself, oh, what a dumb bunny? That's one of my favorite phrases, what a dumb bunny, or a Dumbledore. So shame can center around something called unwanted identities. And this is a really interesting connection. I loved this section of her book. Our unwanted identities are characteristics that undermine our inner vision of our ideal self. So I'm going to run through a list of unwanted identities and just hear it. Close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that to feel the words and see if you feel any buttons being pushed. Pushy, loudmouth, brash, way too direct, controlling, shy, quiet, what a pushover, a health nut, sickly, weak, indecisive, wishy-washy, hard-headed, stubborn, a tightwad, a big spender, promiscuous, frigid, perfectionist, slacker, successful working mom, bad parent, a do-nothing stay-at-home mom, too sensitive, callous, indifferent, too emotional, cold-hearted, stoic, overambitious and highly driven, unmotivated, loser, gullible, naive, a know-it-all, self-indulgent and uncaring, overly sympathetic, screwed up, hot mess, generally broken. Oh, they have life mastered. They got it all under control. What people may say about us behind our backs can mirror our list of unwanted identities. One of our deep fears is that people will use our most loathsome identities to describe us. Most of us probably know that there can be a huge disconnect between how we want to show up and how we are perceived. Let's remember that anyone else's opinion of us, everyone else's opinion of us, is their business. In fact, can we just say that out loud? Everyone else's opinion of me is their business. Right? It just takes the power right out of it. Our propensity to judge others. I'm not saying that anyone in the room is judgmental. So do not misinterpret this statement. Our propensity to judge others is deeply motivated by our need to evaluate our own abilities, our own perception, our own beliefs and values. Think of our unwanted identities in juxtaposition to how we actually want to be perceived. Well-spoken, friendly, approachable, always approachable, physically fit, confident, open-minded, fiscally responsible, just sexy enough, respected colleague, successful parent, meaning my child hasn't been arrested in the last 10 days, emotionally mature and available, knowledgeable, a caring, dependable friend, capably handles what life brings at all times, eventually. I mean, I can get there eventually, sometimes more quickly than others. Life brings really, really interesting stuff. I've had a crazy summer. So there's a principle that acts as a catalyst for exposing our failed expectations of others and of ourselves. But let us imprint this, maybe as this week's tattoo. When my self-worth depends on the approval of someone else, I've put myself in great jeopardy. When my self-worth depends on the approval of another person, I've put myself in great jeopardy. So now that we've explored, and trust me, just the tip. It's Brene Brown, Is It Just Me, is the book. So now that we've explored just the tip of the iceberg, let's look at what Brown calls shame resilience. I love that word, resilience. It's our ability to recognize shame when we experience it and when we're using it, and then move through that in a constructive way. So there's 4 elements for my note takers online, my Zoomers. I forgot to give a shout out to our online peeps. For every one person sitting in this temple of taupe, there are 3 others online. So that's amazing. Yeah, that's usually where I am. So there are 4 elements, and before we talk about this, I want to remind us, I'm not talking about a one and done exercise. You walk through these 4 steps and you're over shame. Is that what you wanted, Adam? Yeah, dang. Me too. It's a spiritual practice that we can choose to incorporate in our lives. Are we ready? 4 elements. First one, recognize and understand our shame triggers. And again, many of them go back to very early ages. We learn to identify those visceral sensations, that gasp, that holding our breath. We learn to identify the emotions and the thoughts before we react. We know the difference between react and respond, being spiritually mature grown-ups. When we respond, we're coming from a place of principle. When we react, we have been triggered in that knee-jerk, and my mouth opens up and stuff comes out before my spiritually mature self gets a hold of me, right? So before we react, we identify. And then we look for patterns. Is it around certain people that we have this feeling or this thought? Is it certain situations? And we start to make notes of those patterns so that we can better understand our triggers. And under recognizing and understanding, take a look around and notice the peeps around whom you typically feel shame. And like I said, it can be super subtle. It can be. Brene Brown gave an example of shortly after the birth of her first child, she had lunch with a friend, and she made the comment, "I cannot believe how exhausted I am." And her friend said, "Oh, I think parenthood is just wonderful." And she said it took her a minute to figure out what a left jab that was. So it can be really insidious. Recognize and understand triggers. Practice critical awareness. Hopefully you've heard me say at one point or another, awareness is 90% of the trip. Yes? It's like once we can identify it, once we can see it, once we can bring it to light. And shame works like a zoom lens. It comes in tight and it comes in hot. And we have bought into those messages that are being used to shame us. We can only see our flaws. And we're struggling. And we struggle because we think it's just us that feels that way. Is anybody sitting beside the person who thinks it's just me? I see heads going. So when we remember to zoom out, take a breath. Sometimes 3, sometimes it's a counting thing, sometimes it's walking around the block, but pause and remember to zoom out. And we see that bigger context. Every one of us is sitting beside someone who thinks it's just them. We are not alone. We are not alone. We are not alone. And we can reality check those triggers. We can reality check our web peeps. And certainly reality check our expectations. So contextualizing in this step of critical awareness, contextualizing is the key to breaking this connection. Because when we can see the bigger picture, we can demystify shame. And that's a big power. Demystify shame. And we find the bandwidth to make changes. Recognize our triggers, practice awareness, create a connection network. She calls it a connection network. I like the term resilience web. That I'm connected to those peeps around me. We reach out to others. Now, this is a tricky step. It takes a lot of, one of our 12 divine powers is wisdom, discernment, judgment, right judgment. So, before we reach out, we've gained critical awareness, and then it's less scary to talk with the people that we trust about it. And note to self, maybe another tattoo, maybe just sticky note, remind yourself that you're not reaching out to be fixed, for someone else to solve our stuff. We heal when we reach out. Yes, we heal when we connect with others. And it's really critical to discern that trust factor. I don't know if anybody's been burned with that, but it pays to pay attention. So the most difficult and effective action we can take is to reach out and expose our shame to the light of day, because when we force it out of hiding, the light truly dissolves it. You know, again, Brene wrote quite a bit about this topic, and I just want to touch on it. She says that through shame, we work diligently to create a world in which we're not the other. The us and them, socioeconomic, political, religious, right side of the tracks or not. And Brown wrote, most of us are one paycheck, one affair, one divorce, one serious mental or physical health diagnosis, or one drug-addicted kid away from becoming those people. Here's something that's very helpful for us to digest. Every single one of us is the other for someone on the planet. Every single one of us is the other. So the biggest shame resilience builder is realizing we are they. The people that are here to bring peace to the world, it's not them. It's not our government. It's not our political leaders. It's not our priests, our ministers, our whoever, our parents. We are they. Recognize our triggers, critical awareness, reach out, and finally, it's something she calls speaking shame. Shame is a complex language, and speaking it requires skill and practice, like any of our spiritual practices. And it requires us to identify the language that describes the most painful and abstract stuff we probably will ever face. So when we learn to speak our shame, we learn to speak our pain. And speaking shame allows us to genuinely and authentically tell others how we feel and to legitimately ask for what we need. Resilience requires courage, compassion, and connection. And I'm using compassion and empathy here interchangeably. I cannot stress enough that empathy is at the core of our resilience. So let's talk about sympathy and empathy for a sec. Sympathy. I don't really understand and relate to your world, but from here, things look pretty bad. That's sympathy. I agree with you. This is a mess. Empathy. I'm demonstrating my ability to perceive this situation from your perspective. Doing my very best to understand your perspective. Empathy is essential for building meaningful relationships. And being empathic is our capacity to tap into our own experiences, to deeply connect with the person who's sharing their own experience. It's about fully engaging, fully being present, and wanting to understand, wanting to get it in our heart space. Empathy, Brene Brown says, is the strongest antidote for shame. That works for our own selves as well, yes? Pema Chodron wrote, when we practice generating compassion, we can expect to experience the fear of our own pain. Anybody ever noticed a death of a loved one, a close one, that, maybe it's just me, but I tend to kind of go back to the souls, the lives that I really, really grieve and sort of process that at another level. Brene Brown wrote, only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Makes sense, yeah? Speaking of being empathic and relatable. So I just invite us to notice, if anyone has ever shared their shame with us, do we feel the need to make it better? Do we feel the need to fix it? I remember years ago, a congregant of mine, her spouse had died by suicide, and she was in really deep grief. A close friend came over to see her, and my congregant was, weeping and grieving. And her friend told her, that's enough now. And she said to her friend, you need to go, because you're not understanding where I am and what's going on. We all grieve very differently. And we all have a right to our own process with that. So we're not reaching out to be fixed. I have said to my spouse, I wonder if he's watching today. I have said to my spouse, you don't need to tell me anything about it. I'm just asking you to hear how I feel. Just asking you to hear how I feel. Do we itch to redirect the conversation? Anybody done that? Humor is a good diversion. So we just kind of flip over to another channel. Or do we have the bandwidth? Do we have, the practice, the spiritual maturity to be present? So as we're wrapping up, I want to touch on perfectionism. Anybody familiar with that paradigm? I remember years and years ago in a work setting, I was working on this document, and one of the guys came by and said, "Are you done yet? It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be done." And I looked up and said, I'm going to write that down. Brown wrote that when people spoke about the permanency of mistakes, trauma, and the inability to move away from perfectionism, at least 80% of her interviewees cited the source as family system. Perfectionism. Get it right. In 1985, I think that was 40 years ago. I was in my therapist's office. I was living and working in Des Moines, and I'm telling her my story about my job and my relationship and my life, and she leaned forward and said, "Hey, Brenda, where is it you learn to beat your head against the wall until someone tells you it's okay to stop?" And it took my breath away. I was completely taken aback. I sat back and I said, well, my mom was my primary parent. My dad worked a lot. And I said, well, I don't remember my mom ever saying anything like that to me. And she chuckled and said, oh, it doesn't have to be verbal, honey. So when we grant ourselves, and this is an invitation, when we grant ourselves the grace, the spaciousness to be imperfect, to be in this human condition that we opted for, we signed up. When we can do that, we begin to realize our worth. And when we choose to activate this shame resilience practice, we are actually choosing progress, moving forward, moving along the spiritual continuum rather than perfection. And when we anchor and center solidly in our true nature, when we anchor and center in the idea that we are created out of pure love, not the emotion love, the energy, the power of love, then we no longer feel the urge to chase acceptance or belonging by attempting to become whatever we think other people think we need to be. Grace and spaciousness. Namaste.